started in just a moment. I'll give a chance for the recording. Great. All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. My name again is Caroline Palmer from the Minnesota Department of Health, and I help to coordinate the Human Trafficking Task Force meetings along with our Sexual Violence Prevention team. That includes Mary Hopkins and Marissa Regat. It also includes our Injury and Violence Prevention Unit Supervisor, Beatrice Menento. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. As you sign in, please be sure to introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know where you're from. The Minnesota Human Trafficking Task Force is an informal statewide network made up of people from around the state. The purpose of the task force is to address human trafficking in Minnesota through services, response, and prevention. This includes sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, as well as labor trafficking and exploitation, and also includes individuals of all ages. We convene these quarterly meetings, which include a number of presentations to keep us all informed, especially during the time when we cannot meet together in person. While we cannot have an in-person discussion, we encourage you to send chat questions, and we will answer them or follow up after the meeting. And please be sure to complete the post-event evaluation when that comes around into your email box. We have over 1,300 people from around the state and outside of Minnesota who are signed up on the task force list, the Sex and Labor Trafficking Prevention Network listserv, also called MINSTIFN, and also our Facebook page. Please sign on to these lists or join us on social media if you're not already there in order to receive updates. Our meetings are recorded, and the recordings are made available on the Trafficking Task Force website approximately a week after each meeting. And we do send an email out announcing that it's available. Today we have two very important presentations. First, we will hear from Assistant Attorney General Nailushi Ranawira from the Minnesota Attorney General's Office. She will provide information about a new project that began last fall to assist with expungement, or sealing criminal records for qualified persons. This is a statewide project that can help seal criminal records and open up opportunity. MDH is pleased to support this program, and we hope that it will assist some survivors of trafficking and exploitation to address criminal records caused by their victimization. Next, we will hear from several representatives from the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force about the report they recently presented to the state legislature. Beatrice Menento will provide further introduction before they speak. I will return at the end of this meeting to give a brief update about safe harbor activities. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Nailushi Ranawira, and thank you so much, Nailushi, for joining us today.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much. So 4 months ago, back in October 2020, our office implemented this statewide expungement program using prosecutor-initiated expungement. So in Minnesota, the expungement of criminal records, the law related to expungement is stated in Minnesota Statute Chapter 609A. Under the statute, there are two ways to get your records expunged or sealed. One is expungement by petition. This is the mostly used method and most traditional way of getting someone's criminal records expunged. The law relating to expunge by petition is stated in 609A.02. And a person who has a criminal record can get expunged by filing a petition. And if the person has a dismissal or acquittal or a gross misdemeanor, misdemeanor, and a felony, but there are like 70 different felonies that are eligible under the statute, they can request for expungement and get their convictions expunged. And under the law, there is a waiting period for each type of conviction before you file for petition. So for dismissals and acquittals, there's no waiting period because under the law, they are resolved in favor of the petitioner. So as soon as a person gets a dismissal or acquittal, they can file for expungement. For diversion and for stay of adjudication, a person has to wait 1 year before they file for expungement. So 1 year without any new charges. And for misdemeanors, the waiting period is 2 years with no new convictions. For gross misdemeanors, it's 4 years, and the 70 different felonies, it's a 5-year waiting period. So once a person submits their petition to court, the court will analyze the petition using 12-factor analysis. So for example, the court will look at the severity of the conviction and how much time has left from the conviction and how this person has rehabilitated him or herself, and the involvement, community involvement, employment history, so on. So there are 12 factors that court will analyze before they make a decision. And with this traditional way of expungement by petition, there is a filing fee of $300, as well as the petitioner has to serve the petition to executive agencies that might have records of the conviction, like BCA and Human Services Department, Attorney General, and the Minnesota Department of Health, Public Safety, and so on. So the person has to serve a copy of the petition to these agencies, and the agencies will get 60 days to file any recommendations or objections with the court. And in the traditional way of expungement by petition, there is a formal hearing, and at the hearing, the person can make arguments why he deserves the expungement. But the other way of expunging a record, criminal history, and this is what we use in the statewide expungement program, is expungement by prosecutor agreement. This is not very much used, and because the prosecutor is the one who's filing for expungement, and prosecutor stipulated expungement. So the law related to this is stated in 609A.025, and the difference between the traditional way of expungement and the prosecutor-initiated expungement is there's no petition. There will be a stipulation and proposed order, and that will be filed with the court by the prosecutor. And there's no filing fee. There's no $300 filing fee, as well as there's no formal hearing. So everything is administratively done. But still, the person has to satisfy the waiting period, even with the prosecutor-agreed expungement, and the court will still do the 12-factor analysis. In this case, since the Attorney General's office, under the statewide expungement program, since we coordinate the expungements, we are the one who's doing the pleading. We will draft the stipulation and the proposed order, and we work with the prosecutors in getting the expungements done, because none of these cases were prosecuted by our office. So we have to work with each prosecutor when we handle the cases. And as mentioned, there's no hearing under this process, so everything is done by administratively. So if someone needs to get our help, get the Attorney General's office to help with their expungement using the prosecutor-initiated expungement, they can submit their application by visiting helpsealmyrecord.org. You can just Google helpsealmyrecord.org or go to Attorney General's website, and in the search button, if you put Seal My Records or expungement, then it will pop up to the helpsealmyrecord.org web page. So the good thing about this web page is it's a very mobile-friendly web portal and streamlined questionnaire. And the person who's applying for expungement, they only have to select yes, no, or I don't know type of answers. It will take less than 5 minutes to submit your application, because it's very straightforward, very short application process. And as I mentioned earlier, there's no petition, no court appearance, no filing fee. So this is like when you, this is the web page that holds the helpsealmyrecords.org. And as you can see, there are 4 buttons when you visit the website. One is for Hennepin County, one is for Ramsey, one is for Washington, and the other one for all other counties. why we have these 3 buttons for Hennepin, Ramsey, and Washington is because they have their own program, own expungement program for their county convictions. But since it's a county conviction, they will only do the felony convictions that has happened in that county. So if someone has a felony conviction in Hennepin County, they can click on the Hennepin County button and it will straight go to the Hennepin County expungement application. Same with Ramsey County and Washington County. So if someone has a conviction in any other county, then this is the place they have to click on, all other counties. And under our statewide expungement program, we not only deal with felony convictions, we expunge petty misdemeanors, misdemeanors, gross misdemeanors as well. So we deal with county attorneys and city attorneys when we are processing expungement application. So this is the application. Once they click on to the statewide expungement application, this is what they will see. Basic information, your first name, last name, phone number, address, birth date, very basic information. But here we have, targeted to get more applications from people who have been victims at the time of the conviction, victims of sex trafficking or victims of domestic violence. This is where we are wanting to use the statute 609A.03 subdivision 6A, where they will, if a person has a criminal conviction as being a victim of a crime, then their criminal records can be expunged and their status will restore to where they were before the conviction. So not only can steal their criminal records, they can deny ever having that record, even under oath they are testifying in court. So that's why we want to target applicants who have been victims at the time of conviction. So if someone says yes to any of these questions, then our next step is to follow up with them and send them an email or give them a call and get more information and decide whether their conviction will fall under the statute 609A.03 subdivision 6A. So the application process is like once the person submits the application, then Attorney General's office receives a system-generated email with the application details, and it will generate to a spreadsheet for easy access. And the applicant will get acknowledgement email, that's also a system-generated email saying that we have received the application, and if we need more information, we'll be in touch with them in the future. So each application will do a preliminary screening using Mensa's and BCA records. So for each applicant, we request a BCA criminal history record because in that way, we can get a full understanding of the criminal history when we are doing the analysis. So once we do the analysis, if we believe that the person's conviction is eligible under the law, then the next step is for us to connect with the prosecutor, whoever prosecuted the conviction, and present the details of the case and the criminal history and let them know that we have got this application and whether they would like to stipulate to an expungement. So if the prosecutor, after reviewing the case details, if the prosecutor likes to stipulate to the expungement, then we'll start doing the pleadings. And in that stage, we will again connect with the applicant to get more information about how this conviction has affected them in getting a job or housing or how they have rehabilitated themselves after this conviction, because we need to do this 12 fact analysis when we are drafting the stipulation. So if a person's conviction is not eligible, then we will send them back an email and let them know that their conviction is not eligible under our process, statewide expungement process. And we always give them the reason why. So it can be that they have not satisfied the waiting period requirement, or the conviction is not eligible under the law. Like for example, fourth degree drug convictions are not eligible under the law, or third degree burglary. So they will let them know why we are declining the application. And the third reason that we might decline is if the prosecutor says no to stipulate to an expungement, then we will let them know that under the statewide expungement process, the application will not proceed. However, if they are eligible under the law, then we will let them know that their conviction may be eligible under the traditional way of expungement, and at that time we will give them the information of Minnesota Bar Association and Volunteer Attorneys Network. So if they want to hire an attorney or get advice from an attorney, they can do that. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we started this statewide expungement program back in October 2020. And as of the end of the year, we have received 1,480 applications. And so far, we have reviewed 200 applications, and out of 200, 141 was eligible, 59 was not eligible. And we receive 5 to 8 new applications daily. So this number is going up daily, and we have received applications from all over the place and from 87 counties. The reason why this review is not fast enough, or it's not going as we want to, is because right now I'm the only person who's reviewing this application and working on the project. So it takes time to review applications and coordinating with the prosecutors. But the good news is we have hired 6 new law students from law schools to work on the project. So I expect that this number will go up and we can deal with the backlog in a faster manner and serve more Minnesotans. So before I end my presentation, I would like to share 2 success stories so far. One is it was a theft misdemeanor conviction, and theft was less than $15, and that was the only conviction this person has in his record, not even a traffic ticket. But due to that theft misdemeanor, he was denied with 13 jobs and he was denied housing. So we were able to get his conviction expunged, and now he's pursuing his studies to get a career in a different field. So that's my success story number 1. Number 2 is it was a domestic assault misdemeanor matter, and at the time of the conviction, this person was pursuing a career in nursing, and because of the conviction, she could not pursue a career in nursing, so she had to give up her dream job, and then she had to do 3 part-time jobs to care for her 2 children. So, and she was also denied housing many times. So when I called her to let her know that we will be handling her expungement matter and I need more information to draft my stipulation, she was so thankful, and because now she can go back to her dream job and do more service to the community. And she said that was the best Christmas gift she ever received. So that made my day. So thank you so much, and if you have questions after the presentation, I would love to answer. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my experience and information about the statewide expungement program.
Thank you so much, Nailushi. This is a wonderful project, and we do have one question. Wondering how victims of the crimes are notified during the expungement project. So, for example, in a crime where there was another victim, do they receive some sort of notification that an expungement is being sought?
Yes, always. if it's a domestic violence case, or if there's any victim under the statute also, we are required to give victim notification. So we always notify the victim, and we give like 10 days for them to contact me or the prosecuting authority. So if they can send in writing or call me and let them know what their thoughts on that. So we always give notice to the victim.
Great, thank you. I'm checking to see here if we have any other questions from anybody.
Hi, Caroline. This is Beatriz. I noticed that there was one question in the chat about the if this is available for individuals who have been involved in labor trafficking as well.
Yes, I think we haven't got any cases so far in that manner, but I think the statute doesn't specify what type of victim. So I think if the conviction, at the time of the conviction, if the person was a victim of a crime, then they'll be eligible.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nailushi. We also have a question here.
Thank you.
Asking about relevancy to human trafficking. I'm wondering if you could maybe explain a little bit about how expungement can help crime victims be able to move forward in their lives.
Yes. So under this, thank you. So under the statute 609A.03 subdivision 6A, it specifically says that if someone at the time of committing the crime and at the time of conviction, if that person committed that crime as being a victim of a crime, then that conviction can be expunged, and that person the person's situation will be restored to where he or she was before the conviction. So that means it's not only getting sealed, but if a person has to testify in court or something, and if there was a question about have you ever been convicted of a crime, for that particular crime they can deny ever even having that conviction. So this will allow them to get, like, when sealing a record, always help getting jobs and housing. That's what I have seen with my experience dealing with these applicants, because always, like, even for a theft misdemeanor conviction, there'll be consequences of finding jobs or finding housing. So that will be a very, like, once you seal your records, that will eliminate those obstacles. So, and for victims of crime, I think restoring their status before the crime is a great way of giving their life back.
Great, thank you so much, Nailushi. I don't think I see any more questions, but I definitely encourage everybody to check out this new program. It's so exciting to have this opportunity to give people a second chance in their lives, and particularly for people who have been victimized, who can, exactly what Nailushi said, be able to access the services and new opportunities and jobs and housing that they deserve. So thank you so much for all of your work, Nailushi, and we look forward to continuing to partner with you.
Thank you.
Great, and now I'm going to turn things over to Beatriz Menento, and she is going to introduce our next section.
Yes, hello. So my name is Beatriz Menento, and I'm the supervisor for the Violence Prevention Programs Unit here at the Minnesota Department of Health. And this unit houses two programs, of which I'm guessing many of you are already familiar, but the Sexual Violence Prevention Program, which includes Mary Hopkins and Marissa Regay, and the Human Trafficking Prevention Safe Harbor Program, which includes Caroline Palmer, Amanda Colgrove, Paula Schaefer, Tasha Scott, and our new evaluator, Jory Catalpa. So it's my pleasure today to present and to introduce the second presentation. This is a panel that will present on the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women report to the legislature. In addition to the valuable information itself that this report has, it's particularly thrilling to me to have this panel today, because what it represents for me is this value in the collaboration between the legislature, the government agency, and community advocacy. It demonstrates the work that can be done and how to accomplish tasks that we need to accomplish to address the vital issues and direct our work. So this information is useful because it can help us make decisions about how we move forward. So there's certainly more to be done, and I know that the report is just the first step, but it is a really important step because it's been taken to draw resources and draw the light towards an injustice that those in the movement have been aware of for very long. So we know that the data shows that American Indian women and girls make up less than 1% of the Minnesota population, but yet they account for 9% of all murdered women and girls. So there may be 50 or more missing American Indian women and girls in Minnesota at any given month. So this Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force was created by the Minnesota legislature in 2019 to do a number of things. Really address the systemic causes behind the disproportionate violence that's experienced by Indigenous women and girls, to collect and report on data about this violence, and address policies or practices in institutions that impact the violence against Indigenous women and girls, with this end goal of reducing and eliminating the violence that exists and helping Indigenous women and girls who are victims and survivors, their families, and the communities at large to prevent and heal from the violence. So this presentation that you're going to hear now highlights some of the key findings from the task force research and an overview of the mandates from this report that was submitted in December of 2020. We will hear from several speakers. Senator Mary Kunesh, having served as a state representative since 2017, she's now elected to the Minnesota Senate in 2020. And in addition to numerous legislative efforts fostering equity and justice, Senator Kunesh is the author and passed the legislation that initiated the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force in session of 2019. We'll also hear from Nicole Martin-Rogers, who is the lead researcher with Wilder Research. She's been there since 2001, and she provides research and evaluation services to a wide range of programs and organizations. We'll also hear from Nicole Matthews, who is the executive director of the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, and this is a statewide tribal coalition and national tribal technical assistance provider that addresses sexual violence and sex trafficking against Indigenous women. And Nicole is the vice chair of Minnesota's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force. She's also a national and international speaker on these issues. And then also Nigel Perot, who in his previous role with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety's Office of Justice Programs as the tribal liaison, was the task force coordinator for this Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force, serving as the DPS liaison for the task force and then supporting the work for the task force in developing the report itself. He's recently started with the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, MNCASA, as the national and state program director overseeing the coalition's national and state technical assistance work with the Sexual Violence Justice Institute. So I will now hand it over to the panel, and thank you so much for your time in sharing this really valuable information. Thank you.
Well, good morning. This is Senator Mary Kunesh. Thank you for inviting us here to share some of our findings for this Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force report. Yes, I did. I authored and was able to pass this task force in the state legislature, but honestly, if it had not been for the other three people on this panel this morning, I don't know that we would have been nearly as successful or have been able to do it as quickly as we were able to. In 2016, I had listened to the preliminary report coming out of Canada on their national MMIW report, and in the same summer, there were a number of incidences that just proved the necessity for Minnesota's own Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force. And when we say women, specifically for women, we also just know that it also includes girls, boys, men, and our Two-Spirit communities as well. And so this is a study that we are hoping will expand across communities. And it was a daunting task at first. I was a new legislator. I was not familiar with the legislative process, but through the guidance of many people and the collaboration of our Native community, we created a task force that we felt, a plan that we felt was doable and realistic and really included the necessary councils and commissions and offices, but especially the community and our Native community as well. So it was actually the collaboration of probably over 24 women, Native women mostly, who sat down and created this piece of legislation that then we carried into 2 sessions and were able to pass it in 2019. And that's when the real work, really began. And again, without the guidance and coordination of Nigel and both Nicoles, I don't know that we would have done such a great job with it. So that is a little bit of the background and the context for the MMIW task force. I myself am a descendant of the Standing Rock Reservation, Lakota, and I have my own family stories that our Native women most often are subject to injustices. And so just as it was mentioned earlier, although our American Indian women and girls make up just 1% of our population, between the years of 2010 and 2018, 8% of those of the murdered women and girls in Minnesota were American Indian. And then from anywhere from 27 to 54 American Indian women and girls in Minnesota were missing in any given month from 2012 and 2020. And this is a severe injustice to our Native population. I think that if it were with a context of non-Native or non-people of color, this certainly would have been addressed a lot earlier. But the fact that we're dealing with Indian nations and jurisdictional complexities, and then, of course, just the historic negligence and dismissal of our Native communities, it had gone on way too long. On this slide, you are seeing our 11 tribes here in Minnesota. And of those tribes, you'll see on the left, these are tribes that have the jurisdiction under a law called Public Law 280. And then there are 2, Red Lake and Boys Fort, that chose not to participate in this Public Law 280. Public Law 280 makes jurisdiction, who is in control of investigating wrongdoing. Is it the tribal police? Is it the local police? Is it the county or the state or the federal government? But Public Law 280 originally was enacted in 1953, and it did 2 things that alter the usual allocation of criminal jurisdiction in Indian country. So first of all, on reservations to which it is applied, so those are the tribes on the left, it took away the federal government's authority to prosecute Indian country crimes. And that kind of opens up Indian country to sort of a lawlessness. And second of all, it authorizes the states like Minnesota, and then there's Alaska, California, Nebraska, Oregon, and Wisconsin to prosecute most crimes that occurred in Indian country. So it took out the federal government's responsibility, added it to the state, but within the state, there's always that confusion of who's responsible for prosecuting or investigating these crimes. And because there are few resources often on reservations and out in greater Minnesota, as well as relationships with police officers and that sort of thing. Oftentimes these acts of violence or investigation for missing women went undone, not addressed at all, and that certainly contributed to this whole historic trauma of MMIW. So we created this task force, and we had a few requirements that we put in place, and that was, first of all, to examine the systemic causes behind violence to our Indigenous women and girls. And again, by natural extension, our Two-Spirit and other groups. We wanted to examine and find appropriate methods for tracking and collecting data on violence against Indigenous women and girls. And that's probably one of our biggest responsibilities here, because oftentimes people would ask us, well, what are the numbers? Where is it happening? How many is it happening? When is it happening? But because nobody has ever really kept data in an intentional way, we just didn't have that data. We knew it was happening. We could give you story after story. We could give example after example, but the data was never collected, or it was not collected in a viable way. And so data collection is definitely one of the top issues we need to do. And then we create a report, such as the one that came out in December, on policies and institutions, especially around policing, child welfare, because we know that the foster care system is almost like a direct pathway to sex trafficking and violence. Coroners practices, very sort of haphazard when we talk about data collection again. And then other governmental practices that will impact violence against our women and girls. And so especially around the prosecution of the crimes. We know that oftentimes that's not happening. And so the next thing that we needed to do in this as a result of this task force is to report on measures necessary to address and reduce the violence against Indigenous women and girls. It was one thing to not know about this, but once we know about it, it's basically our moral obligation. It's our responsibility to ensure that we are keeping all of our communities safe. And so as a result of this report, we wanted to make sure that happened. And then we want to examine measures that are going to help the victims, their families, and their communities prevent and heal from the violence. And we know that this violence has done generation, and the kind of generational trauma that our Native communities have experienced, not just this kind of violence, but the neglect and under-resourcing, is going to be a tough job to do. But we are hopeful and optimistic, and really look forward to creating good programs around the report results. On this page, you will see a list of all our different task force members. We had 2 members from each of the legislative bodies, both in the House and the Senate. And then we had folks from across the agencies, the sheriffs, BCA, county attorney. We wanted to make sure that there were representatives from every single one of the tribes, and that there were organizations within those tribes that were a participant. And of course, we wanted to make sure that those that are working with our women and families right now were participants in this. And so you'll see not only was Nicole Matthews a co-chair, but she's also with the Minnesota Indian Women's Sexual Assault Coalition, Mending the Sacred Hoop, Little House with Sheila Lamb, who is also a member. So some of these folks participated in different levels, and they brought their life experiences, their professional knowledge, and, you know, their hearts and their soul into this task force. And for that, you know, we need to thank every single member of this task force. It's certainly a historic piece of legislation, and I'm sure that there will be other states as well as other underrepresented groups here in Minnesota that might take this as a template for addressing violence within their communities as well.
Good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Nigel, formerly with the Department of Public Safety as the tribal liaison and the task force coordinator. I just want to thank everyone on the panel today, our leadership from both Senator Kunesh-Podein and Nicole Matthews, as well as our work with Nicole Martin-Rogers in putting together this task force. As the task force coordinator, I was really responsible for ensuring that we had met the obligations we needed to meet under the statutory language, but also coming from the field of sexual violence and trafficking, I knew there was a different way to also go about doing this in a way that wasn't necessarily tied into kind of how state and legislative authorities oftentimes do these types of reports. I think because of that, I was very thoughtful and intentional about who we were bringing into this as part of additional consulting and contracting that we were doing with them, and ensuring that we brought in people that brought in or had that experience as Native people, or brought that lens of Native experiences to this work. And so part of that was the work that we did with Nicole Martin-Rogers and the work that she's done on these types of projects throughout Indian country here in Minnesota. And we brought in an additional facilitator, Stephanie Autumn, who has done a lot of work around restorative justice in Indian country, both at the state and national level. So it's really important to have that expertise and that experience as part of the staffing, including myself, not only as my experience working in this type of issues and advocate, but also as a Native person myself. When we started this process of kind of figuring out, you know, what is it that we need to, or not necessarily what we need to do, because we're aware of what we need to do, but how to go about doing it. So again, bringing the Indigenous lens was really important for us, and putting together kind of a skeleton of what we thought would be the most relevant way to go about this, given the minimal amount of resources and the minimal amount of time that we had. And looking at this, Senator Kunesh-Podein mentioned this, that during this time we were in the midst of the Canadian reports. I think a lot of people looked at the Canadian report kind of through the same lens as what the state was going to do, when we only had a fraction of the time and the effort, or the time and the resources to do that. So we really thought about it in terms of getting the voices of the people who are impacted the most by this, and getting the voices of those that work with those that are most impacted by this and those expertise. I think what was unique about our task force is that we were, Senator Kunesh-Podein mentioned that a lot of Native women were responsible for getting this legislation passed, and a lot of Native women were there to provide the leadership of this task force. And so putting together kind of the work of the task force, we initially started out with in-person meetings, centered around day-long meetings in person before the pandemic, and unfortunately had to switch over to virtual meetings. But of those meetings, we typically had an expert come in and talk a little bit about a particular topic that was identified by the task force members as a need to build some more knowledge or understanding around. And most of the time we would start those days off having people that have that lived experience, whether it was a family member themselves that were impacted by this as an issue, to talk a little bit about the impact. And the way we really designed that was not necessarily, I should say, like in typical language, when you look at a task force, it's more about on the ground work. But I think our task force theoretically or operationally acted more like a commission. So we didn't have the necessary authority to go into specific cases or to address specific cases. And so when we talked with people or had people come and talk about their experiences, we looked at it from the lens of like, where did the systems fail you, and what did you need to kind of ensure justice for yourself? And so when we had those public comments starting up our day, I don't think there was anything else we could have did that was more eye-opening or informative than any type of presentation or information that we would have provided as staff to that task force to really center ourselves around and to work through the day on. Additionally, in terms of information gathering, we looked at a variety, or Nicole and Wilder looked at a variety of different research and articles around the issue and parts of that issue across Indian Country and Turtle Island here. Like I said, we had some of the opportunity to look at what Canada was doing with the report, and a lot of our work too also centered around two other reports I think that were really impactful here in the state that were provided through Nicole Matthews with MUSAC and the work that they did with the Guardian of Truth, and Susan Keplinger at her time at MAWC did as well with the report, along with other variety of different research that was done in this particular topic around jurisdiction, advocacy services, child welfare, and other things that were lined around in terms of the report or the statutory requirements. And then interviews with 32 experts around this issue, both state and nationally. And I noticed a lot of our folks that were part of this process and the interviewing are also participants today. So I also thank you again for your time and sharing your information expertise with us. Additionally, we looked at state data on this issue that was identified by our task force members and identified within the statutory language. So working with the child welfare information and the Department of Human Services with figuring out kind of the impact around runaway youth, child welfare data, and specific safe harbor data with MDH, deaths and human trafficking data through safe harbor. And this was a little bit tricky for us because, again, we were in the middle of the pandemic, so a lot of the MDH staffing was required and reallocated to address issues around the pandemic. But I think with a lot of the information that we were able to get, it was a lot easier to get the stat data, I would say, than the state data than I thought it was going to be. So I, again, appreciate the work of our state folks that are on the call as well to help with this information, and then finally gathering information and data from missing persons and crimes through the BCA in relation to kind of that data piece. I think we found pretty specifically that there is information out there, but there just is a lack of connectivity between those and addressing and looking at the data as a whole versus the individual data. And so a lot of that individual data we found in relation to kind of the overview of the data, I think we were able to see more specific gaps within data collection systems as well. And then working with our task force as well to kind of deliberate and brainstorm and refine mandates. We really looked at our task force members to really identify, what was, especially since they are on the ground and doing this work day to day, what do you need and what do you think would be the most effective in terms of addressing these issues and defining those mandates, and then also pulling in that information from the public comments and the people of lived experience as well to help draw those out. Root causes. So as Beatrice alluded to, the root causes that we found as a result of this entirety of this report was a lot of these issues are kind of centered around three root causes of why there's such a disparity with Native women, and that's, I think, also as Beatrice kind of alluded to, I think these are things that people knew about and we are aware of, and not having the paper, I think, gives it a lot more power. But looking at the impacts of colonization and historical trauma across the different systems that are interacting with Native women and girls and people in general, the racism that also ties into that, and the practices and the policies that disenfranchise many Native women and girls from seeking justice, and then the sexism and objectification many Native women and girls experience that make them more targeted and highly sought after by perpetrators in relation to victimization and perpetration, especially when we look also at the other layers that impact this as well, like the criminal jurisdictional issues. And going into the next slide, recognizing that these all play into systemic risk factors that make vulnerability exacerbate, and that we're looking at it from the lens of these are systemic issues that are causing this and not individual issues that our Native women and girls are experiencing. And so those systemic risk factors also tie into an increase in poverty and a lack of housing amongst Native people, that involvement in child welfare and criminal justice systems, and then the experience of victimization through domestic violence or trafficking as well.
Nigel, sorry, Nigel, we just had a request if you could speak up a little louder, please.
Oh, I am trying to speak up, but it might be my speaker, so I apologize. Next slide. Oh, seeking justice. Again, we look at the response from systems, and there is an unequitable response to these types of cases in regards to the investigation, prosecution, and sentencing of as well, and that we don't see a fair and equal treatment for Indigenous victims as it relates to these crimes. And then also the impact of the system as well shows that we have an inadequate amount of culture responsive and healing resources for Native women and girls, their families, and the communities in relation to seeking justice.
Thanks, Nigel. Good morning, everyone. This is Nicole Martin-Rogers. I'm a descendant of White Earth Nation, and I'm a senior research manager at Wilder Research, and I led the research that we're talking about today for the MMIW task force. I'm honored to be a part of this project and to have an opportunity to tell you about our work today. Given the focus of this meeting, we decided to dig a bit more into some of the findings related to trafficking and the MMIW injustice in Minnesota. And in the most recent year for which data are available, we know that 1 out of 5 reported sex trafficking incidents involved American Indian victims. And you might recall that American Indians make up about 1% of the state's population, so we're very overrepresented among that group of trafficking victims. Many of the experts who we interviewed talked about the market for Indigenous women and girls. Indigenous women have been portrayed as exotic, hypersexualized, and victims who need to be conquered. This has been done by the media, and I mean, this ranges from history books to Disney movies to news stories, contemporary news stories about missing or murdered Indigenous women victims or trafficking victims, and all the way to hardcore pornography. So across these different spectrums of media, we have a common theme of Indigenous women being portrayed in this way, and this historical pattern really was established back from when the first Europeans arrived on the shores of North America and the way that they proceeded to colonize Indigenous communities. It continues to this day with internet prostitution. There's a lot of trafficking that happens at large sporting events or entertainment events, at casinos, and also the victimization of women and girls in entire communities that happens at these man camps that go along with extractive industries and oil pipelines, and also interstate or international shipping industries. So there's a lot of different ways that trafficking affects Indigenous women and girls in their communities. An important aspect of the continuing MMIW injustice is the extent to which perpetrators of these crimes are not held accountable. You can see from this visual that only a really small proportion of all the people who are arrested for trafficking end up getting convicted in Minnesota. In general, sex trafficking cases can be difficult to prosecute. Many of the informants that we interviewed talked about the challenges of getting sex trafficking survivors to participate in the process of bringing their perpetrators to court and sending them to prison. It could be a trauma-induced response of not being able to participate in the case. It could be due to the victim's ongoing challenges with substance use or addiction. Could be their fear of facing consequences from their perpetrators or from the system, such as losing their children to child protection. In other cases, the system, as Senator Kunesh mentioned, the system might lack resources or decline to adequately investigate or prosecute cases. They might have a lack of resources, or there might be a systemic bias against Indigenous women and girls, especially those who are involved in prostitution. And the end result is sex trafficking crimes aren't being prosecuted, And individual victims and entire communities begin to believe that they will not get justice even if they do come forward, which might result in more Indigenous victims not even seeking help when they are being exploited or victimized. Another topic from the report that I mentioned briefly a minute ago, and we thought that this group might be particularly interested in, is the connection between extractive industries and the man camps that go along with them, and how this causes problems for communities that may range from housing shortages to depletion of healthcare services or other resources in small communities when thousands of people move in practically overnight. There's also the issue of having lots of men, some of whom may have histories of sexual violence. They're working in difficult conditions under long hours, and then they get a paycheck and don't have anything to do or anywhere to go. This leads to a big market for sex work and also may lead to violence and exploitation of local women and girls. I heard several times from key informants and advocates while working on this project, this is referred to as a double rape of the environment and the women and girls who live in these communities. In Minnesota right now, there's a big push to stop the construction of the Line 3 pipeline that runs across the northern part of the state. You can see this image on the left shows several Indigenous women who are leading the water protection efforts. And on the right, you can see an image from the Your Call Minnesota group, which was actually started by Enbridge and other entities of sex trafficking. And it was, I believe, like some kind of requirement of the Line 3 project permit. And Senator Kunesh might want to say more about that. One of the mandates for the task force was to encourage and require these companies that are leading these pipeline projects, similar projects in Indian country, to take a more active and earnest role in keeping communities that they're coming into safe by doing criminal background checks, hiring sexual predators, providing training for their staff and monitoring at their sites, and holding staff and leadership accountable for their actions. So I'm going to stop there. Senator, I don't know if you wanted to say anything else briefly about that. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Nicole Matthews to talk more about the mandates.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. Yep, you know, this Line 3 coming in through Minnesota has really raised a lot of issues once again around the exploitation of women and the negative effects that these large extraction projects bring to the different areas within the states in the United States. And we have pushed back against this. Enbridge promised that they would make sure that they put their employees through vigorous sex trafficking or exploitation training. And from what I understand, part of that they have done that. There was a chunk of money that was supposed to be dispersed to some of the organizations that work with violence against women and families that were supposed to be distributed before the project even began. Unfortunately, from what I understand, those funds have not been dispersed yet, and so I'm hoping that will happen soon, because just this weekend I had calls from up north with people concerned about there seems to be an uptick or a little bit of action or buzz around some trafficking issues out of gas stations and gas stop places. All of the hotels are just sort of busting with all these men. And of course, we're concerned. I mean, it's just a matter of time before something happens. And we don't want that something to be our women or our communities here in Minnesota. And so there's strong work going on to ensure that our communities are safe, but some of this historic practices are really hard to break through. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Nicole Matthews again. It's nice to be with you all this morning. I'm not going to cover, I don't think we have enough time to cover every single mandate, but I'm going to go over a few of them. And so first, I think, I wanted to also follow up on some of what was talked about with the extractive industries. I think it's really important to pay attention to what's happening in our state. And we have seen this, happen in other states as well. And certainly I think, and it will go along with these mandates as well. Like, we need to look at prevention. We need to look at how do we truly address the exploitation of our communities, of our women, of our Two-Spirit relatives, to really, make a change, because I think it's huge. We need to look at what happens to the land, to our relatives. So, mandates, I think, we got a lot of people, as you heard, to really talk about what needs to happen, and we looked at all issues. And one of the big things that came out of it was to create a Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Office to provide ongoing attention to and leadership for this issue. And along with that, they would work with stakeholders across the state and produce an annual Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's report and dashboard. So they would keep an eye on the issue. They would look at cases and tracking cases. They provide an overview of the injustice and track changes over time. So we can really see if there's been an impact, if the work that we're doing is making a difference, and if and what needs to change, and what policy things need to change. Maybe facilitate further research, evaluate progress towards the implementation of the full report from the task force. Facilitate technical assistance for local and tribal law enforcement agencies during MMIW cases, and conduct and report on the results of case reviews for cases. Go ahead. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. I think another one that is, important to look at is to, expanding Minnesota's safe harbor law. And I know there has been a lot of conversations in different groups across the state. And, I don't think we're the only state to look at expanding these protections for all victims. But really having more conversations and looking at what that might actually look like to expand Minnesota's safe harbor law to all trafficking victims, and to really look at them as victims. Because right now, as we all know, they are looked at as criminals. And so I think if you want to move to the next slide, thank you. Also, I think along with this is preventing and reducing the harms of trafficking, sexual exploitation, and normalized violence. And so that's what I was talking about, with the Line 3 stuff and all the action that is happening and protests that are happening in the state in northern Minnesota. And we were just hearing about, things that are happening, women that are being exploited in truck stops and things. We really need to look at, what does prevention look like? How do we, stop the normalization of violence and exploitation of our women? It's not just that there are men that are gathered that are bored and don't have anything to do, right? It's about the fact that that it's allowed to happen, that there are norms in this country, in our society, that allows it to be okay. That we look at trafficking, and we know that, in studies of trafficking, we hear of men who know all the harms, but it's almost like a rite of passage. It's like they're just allowed to do it, and there's very little consequences. So we need to look at prevention and really address prevention. And then along with that, we need to have and require sex trafficking awareness, training, and targeted prevention in Indian country and in areas where extractive industries such as oil and mining camps are located. And when we have casinos and hotels, which oftentimes are the main, not that they happen because of casinos, but it happens because they're oftentimes the only large business that brings a lot of people to that community. You can go to the next slide. So right now, the task force has not ended. We are still working. One of the things I think we really learned when listening to the group in Canada was that it was really important to talk about implementation, that it's not just about gathering the data and producing a report of recommendations or mandates, but it's also about what is our implementation planning, what are the next steps. So that's what we're working on through June of this year. We are, with COVID and not being able to meet in person, we are still holding our MMIW rally this year on February 14th, but it will be virtual. So we will be, there's a number of events that you all can connect to. We will have 4 days of events starting on February 11th. February 11th, actually, the Elders Lodge will be starting a sacred fire at 6 a.m. And they will watch that fire and tend that fire until sunset on February 14th. And they do this every year to start a sacred fire to honor the missing and murdered Indigenous women. On day 2, February 12th, we will have a virtual art workshop. Some of you who have been involved in our events know that we usually have an in-person art workshop. Rory Wake 'em Up is going to do a virtual art workshop this year, so be looking for the link to be able to participate in that. Day 3, we are having a virtual community sharing day where you can create your own visual public awareness, content, art, photos, stories of relatives who are missing, or people who you want to remember who've been lost to this issue. And then on day 4, we will have a live panel with some of the people here, some of the people from the task force, and people around the state. And we're going to live stream that on Facebook from 12 until 1:30 that day. So we will have a number of things, and we want to connect to everyone across the state and to really be able to address this issue in a safe way, given that we are not allowed to meet in person safely at this time. And then also we want to look at, really pushing to get this MMIW office implemented and started so that we can really start looking at this issue and have a centralized location that can really make sure and follow up on this report. I'm turning it back to Senator Kunesh.
So there are times, so often folks ask me, what can I do? What can you do to help us with this whole sort of a movement, to tell you the truth? And so I probably don't have to tell this group how important it is that you learn about what sex trafficking really looks like. Is it a young girl who all of a sudden is, getting her nails done and wearing, different clothing, has a different attitude? Was she gone for 2 weeks and now she's back and something is different? Be aware of your surroundings and offer help if somebody that you see looks like they need it. Just step out and step up for those sort of things. We want you to keep track of Amber Alerts and learn about the missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people in your own community. Where oftentimes our Native community is sort of is a silent community. It's one that doesn't stick out. Folks don't stick out so much. And so sometimes you have to look carefully yourself and see what it is that you can do to support them. And then advocate locally to ensure that your sheriff, that your municipal law enforcement, that the school districts and the hospitals, all of these resources that are available to our communities are aware of the MMIW injustices and the role of systems in preventing it, but also addressing it and supporting it. One of the biggest issues is the dismissal when our Native people would come forward and talk about it or report that one of their loved ones has gone missing, and they're just sort of poo-pooed and oh, she's gone partying or she ran away. No, we know when something's wrong, and we need people to listen to it with fidelity. And so contact your representatives, your senators, your state senators, your, federal government representatives with, and ensure that the legislation that we're putting forward or that you think would be very valuable in the prevention or the addressing of this kind of violence. And that actually includes making sure that VAWA, Violence Against Women Act, is reinstated. The past president did not renew it, and he did not encourage the strengthening of the words that protect the violence against women. So in our own state, we want to make sure that we are expanding and supporting the safe harbor laws. And then ICWA, Indian Child Welfare Act. That is at the federal and the state level. The ICWA is a federal mandate around the foster care and the care of children that are removed from families. And we know that our Indian kids are removed from their families at the highest rate of any other group, often for minimal reasons. And so that needs to be one of the areas that we want to work on. And then help individual families or individuals that are involved or trying to escape from trafficking or domestic violence. And maybe you can't do that personally, but you can support organizations. So donate to a shelter. If you can step up and be a foster care provider, because foster care often has issues around trafficking itself, or the kids that are turn 18 and are now expected to be on their own, find themselves without housing, without resources. And one of the, I hate to say the easiest, but the most prevalent ways of survival is to prostitute yourself. And then we know they just get into that vicious cycle. So those are ways. Most of it is just awareness, supporting organizations that are already there, asking questions, and holding people accountable. Thank you. So any questions or comments?
Hi, thank you so much, everybody. We'll give people a chance to put their comments or questions into the chat. A couple of things I wanted to bring up. This is Caroline again from Safe Harbor at NDH. I'm not sure if Bobby Jo Pazdernik from the BCA is on today, but the question you brought up, Senator, about the funding going to the victim services program, that is about to get launched. The BCA has been coordinating with the Public Utilities Commission in order to work on a process to get the payments out to the programs.
That is really good news, and I appreciate hearing that. But I do just want to point out that Enbridge, per the agreement, Enbridge should never have even started the work on the pipeline until those monies were dispersed, and we know that hasn't happened yet. So I'm pleased that it is getting done, but unfortunately not in the timely manner it should have.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. The other piece I wanted to bring up is that you all were talking about some of the activity that is starting to show up in northern Minnesota. One of the things we have at MDH, which was required by the state legislature under law now, is for all hotels and motels and other types of lodging to have training on recognizing sex trafficking on their vicinity as part of their licensure. Although there are some exceptions in the law, particularly for resorts. So we are really trying to connect back with our food pool and lodging and MDH about any activities that might be going on in hotels. But we also really encourage people to make sure that the lodging establishments in their areas are aware of this training requirement. We do have materials for training, for signage, and other things like that, so we can make sure that there's additional focus being put on this. Let's see, I'm not seeing any questions yet.
This is Mary Hopkins with MDH. I did have a question that came into the host account. I'm the host of the meeting today, so I got a couple notices here. We had a question come in from someone who's working with a local nonprofit who's wondering if you have any recommendations or if there are existing recommendations for tracking, or if there's resources or documents that they might be able to access.
Nicole,
are you talking about?
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Are you talking about tracking cases of missing women or?
You know, I'm not sure specifically. That seemed like around the time that they sent in the question was about kind of the lack of data and information around this issue.
Nicole Martin-Rogers, do you have any?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different ways to go about it. I mean, if it's a missing person in Minnesota, you can use the clearinghouse through the BCA. There's also national databases, some of which are voluntary or have more or less information either about deceased persons that have yet to be identified and they're looking for someone to help identify them, or people who are missing and they're looking to be found. And there's a database that is Indigenous specific that is, again, just someone just sort of voluntarily is creating that on their own. So it depends on what they find and where they find information. So it really depends on kind of exactly what you would be looking to find more information about or track of where you would have to go to get that information. There is definitely not one place, like one database where you can go and find all the information about MMIW cases across the board, which, I mean, it kind of makes sense because we're talking about people that are missing, people that are deceased and unidentified. You know, there's all law enforcement tracks all these different things in different ways. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but it's a pretty complicated data systems involved in trying to suss out this MMIW injustice.
And that was one of the biggest problems when we were trying to put together this legislation. And as I mentioned, so often people would want us to justify it or say, you know, where's the data that proves it? Even like with the extraction industries, they came to me and were not pleased that I continue to say that they were a contributor to sex trafficking and violence against our communities and wanted the data. Well, nobody has collected that data, and the data that has been collected was often very skewed and sort of open to interpretation. You know, did this person look Native? Maybe they checked that box. You know, there was just never collection of this data with any kind of fidelity across the nation, or even in Minnesota. Everything was just sort of lumped into, you know, certain, you know, discretionary boxes, and trying to break that down and disseminate it now is almost impossible. And so part of the job of this task force will be to create a data system, a data collection system, so that when there are incidences, the local agencies, the county police, the coroner, all across these systems, as well as the reservation police and resources, are able to share that data. They're putting it into a common database. They're designating the information all in the same way, so they're all speaking the same language and using the same criteria. And that has never happened before. Sharing data is very proprietary, and not everybody or every agency wants to share that data for whatever reason. And so that definitely is one of the top requests from this task force.
Great, thank you so much. We do have a question here about education and what education is being provided in schools, particularly on tribal nations, about safety and relationships.
I think that really varies from tribe to tribe, and I think, you know, communities are putting together, you know, materials specific for their in their tribal community, but it's not across the board. Not all communities are providing the education, and sometimes not even allowed to present on certain topics in schools. So it really depends community to community, but we do see more and more, push in that way to get education in the schools. But what we need is something that really, addresses it in a statewide way, because we know that this doesn't only happen in our tribal communities. We don't all live on the reservation, right? And so, more than half of us live off the reservation. And so we need to have this, information in all schools across the state of Minnesota and across the country about, safety and relationships and about violence and to really talk about, again, going back to that prevention stuff and to talk about those social norms and to not only talk about education or prevention as about, what do women and girls need to know, but let's talk about what do our boys and men need to learn as well, and learning about, respect and learning about, how to live respectfully with one another and, to not be exploitive and objectifying. So.
Yeah. In the state legislature, we have tried almost since I was first elected to that public office 4 or 5 years ago to pass legislation just to allow schools and school districts to provide curriculum and discussion around consent and sex trafficking. And while the legislation might be written and presented and asked to be heard in committee hearings, we have to have full cooperation from our Democrats, our DFLers, from our Republicans, and from the governor. And there's always been a group, has always been the wish of the Republicans not to put that into our schools. They felt that that was something that parents and perhaps your faith community should be discussing, and that it had no place in the schools. And we will continue to bring that forward. I feel like it is super, super important. And the discussion around, just as Nicole said, not just how women can protect themselves, because we've heard the stories of how the aunties and the grandmas and the sisters talk to the younger girls and say, when this happens, not like if this ever happens, but when it happens, because we know it's more prevalent with our Native community. Here's what you need to do or what you need to know. But we need to, again, address it with the perpetrators. And 100%, well, let's say 99.9% of it are men that are soliciting sex and other forms of violence that recur. In one of the committee hearings that we heard, somebody said, well, who is this? Who's doing all this? And it's like, well, men generally, but a county attorney said that she looked into it and she said it was white males in their 30s who were middle to upper class. Though that's sort of the profile. And so we need to make sure that as our students and our kids are going through not just elementary, middle school, high school, but into college, that employers are also supporting the notion that sex trafficking, that this violence against other people is just unacceptable, and it has to be a community. It has to be a statewide, national-wide conversation.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers today. This is wonderful information. Thank you for all of the hard work that you put into the task force, to the legislation, and to the next steps that are to come. Bobby Jo Pasternak did follow up with me. She said I could put her email address in the chat, which I will, so people can contact her about the victim services funding. And again, I just want to say thank you on behalf of the task force for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time so much.
Thank you for taking the time to listen and learn about this.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, I am just going to do a quick wrap up with a couple of highlights from Safe Harbor before we end for the day. Again, this is Caroline Palmer, Minnesota Department of Health, Safe Harbor. And I am just going to, first of all, recognize that this month is Human Trafficking Awareness and Prevention Month. And we know a lot of you have been engaged in your community activities. Please be sure to send them to us. I will again put my email address in the chat so that you can send them. We will share them with our grantees and also out on the MinStip and listserv. We definitely want to promote any panels or workshops, anything that you are doing to raise awareness in your community. I also wanted to point out, many of you may have noticed already, but on our Safe Harbor MDH website, we do have new materials for Safe Harbor. We have a new sort of overview two-pager about all of the services that are provided in Safe Harbor, and we do have an updated services map, which includes also all of the tribal nations that we partner with through the Safe Harbor program. The main thing I also wanted to put on everybody's radar is this year is the year that we conduct our biennial evaluation. We are required under state statute to conduct an evaluation of Safe Harbor and its services, and then we provide that information back to the legislature. This year, as always, we are partnering with the Wilder Foundation, and they are beginning to reach out to youth, to survivors, and also key stakeholders in order to get information about what is going on in their services, what we can improve, and what is working. The full report will be released around September 2021. I really want to emphasize, if you are contacted by the Wilder Foundation to provide information, please participate if you can. We want all comments, positive and negative. This helps us to set our priorities. It helps us to engage others who might want to learn about Safe Harbor. And it's all about building our collaborations to make the system as strong as possible. And finally, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things, and these tie back into the presentation that we just had on the MMIW task force. With regard to line 3, we are tracking any activities, issues that might be coming up with regard to line 3. If you hear of anything in your community that might be related to trafficking, sex or labor trafficking or exploitation, we really encourage you to reach out to your regional navigators. Also, you can reach out to us. We are tracking incidences so that we are aware of what might be happening in communities. As I mentioned earlier, we are also continuing to press forward with reminding hotels about their training obligations. And it's always helpful if you have good relationships with the lodging establishments in your areas to talk with them about their obligations under state law for trafficking education too. As a really good reminder too, we were talking about prevention education at the end of the MIW presentation. Here at the Minnesota Department of Health, we partner with Love 146 and Not a Number. It's an excellent curriculum that can be provided to youth in many different settings, and it can be adapted to be culturally appropriate. It is open to all genders of youth, no matter their experience. And so if you are interested in learning more about that, we can provide additional information on those trainings. Right now, they're a little bit on hold as far as actually giving the trainings because of the COVID pandemic. They can't be done live. But we are looking forward to having more trainings and opportunities later in the year. Hopefully, we will be seeing each other in person by then. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for joining us this morning. I want to thank our speakers again for excellent presentations and for all of the work you do. And just a reminder to please fill out the evaluation when it comes your way. And we always welcome your feedback on these presentations. And also, please give us any ideas that you might have for future presentations. Thank you and have a good day.